Hello, my name is Trish Lynch. Welcome to IOHR TV. Today I'm with Şebnem Korur Fincancı, who is an award-winning forensic physician, an academic and the president of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey. She's a human rights defender, and in 2018 she was wrongly convicted for disseminating terrorist propaganda and was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months. Last July, she managed to finally acquit herself of all charges. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for this broadcasting process. So it's excellent for us to have voices other than in our country.
You're president of the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, which produces reports on torture and helps the victims to gain rehab and legal assistance. Since 1990, you've helped 17,000 people have sought your help. Tell me more about the work that you do.
We have to be thankful to the human rights activists in those periods, particularly the mothers. Because the human rights activism in Turkey had started and strengthened with the mothers of the prisoners in 1980s. So they started to struggle and afterwards established the Human Rights Association, and afterwards we had to establish the Human Rights Foundation because these people, when they are released from the prisons, they were tortured and they need healthcare. But this was a professional healthcare, so we had to have a special rehab clinic for these people. It wasn't easy, of course. I was a volunteer. I have always been a volunteer of Human Rights Foundation. Some people were so scared to come. So in order to reach them, we had to use other means, and we had to persuade them that whomever they are, whatever they did, that they deserve healthcare, they deserve rehabilitation, a proper rehabilitation. So it wasn't an easy process.
But the number is huge, isn't it? 17,000, and you've even said that not everybody that needs help comes forward. So the numbers could be, well, much larger, obviously.
It is really getting worse because in the last years we had predicted that there will be 350, 450 applications for rehabilitation purposes. But this year, last year, 2019, we had 1,000 applications, more than twice what we expected. So it is really horrible, and also many people couldn't come because they are scared and they are afraid of reprisals. When people just allege that they are tortured during the detention period, then immediately police comes forward and puts a file saying that they resisted to the police and they had just used violence against police. So the courts immediately accept that file while they just make the other file, the torture allegation file, pending for many months or sometimes years. And in 2018, it was 26,000 the files, while they just said that they resisted the police. And in 2019, it is 55,000, twice the number. And in 2018, the torture indictments was only 42. And whenever they ask me, what is the number of torture cases? Because I say that all the torture survivors do not come to the foundation. So we are not sure about the real number. And when I learned about that number, I say that it is 42 plus 26,000. Because each file of 26,000 has a background of torture allegations, stopping the torture allegation. It is an intimidation by the police.
We know that torture, as we've just been talking about, is used to quieten anybody who would speak out against the government. Tell me what torture is like in prison. Is it quite widespread, and are any particular groups targeted?
Of course, with the procedural safeguards, till 2015, from 2005 to 2015, we had some amendments of law, and procedural safeguards were very strongly based, so that torture is a bit less in the prisons and the police centers. Then the police carried the torture practice outside on the streets. For example, they started to attack during demonstrations and use tear gas, excessive force, so that we couldn't call it torture. But of course, it amounted to torture, that much tear gas, etc. But after 2015, particularly in the prisons and also in the police centers, they started to torture people more severely. And also, for the last 2 years, we had several cases with allegations of torture, and some of them whom we were able to meet, not as medical doctors, but the lawyers get them in the prison. They interviewed and they described all the injuries. Electrical torture has been back in Turkey. Suspension torture is back in Turkey. Falanga torture. In the last years...
What is suspension torture?
Hangings. They just suspend the person on a higher place with several positions. It's a kind of positional torture. Okay. But it is very painful, of course. And it is not only suspension. While they suspend the person, hang the person on a higher place, they just apply electricity together to the genitalia, for example. And people are kept stripped naked. So it is also a kind of sexual behavior, a lewd sexual torture.
Wow, goodness me. You're also one of the main authors of the UN Istanbul Protocol. Tell me more about the importance of this protocol. What's it about and what does it do?
I think it is one of the first of international guidelines about the effective investigation and documentation of torture for torture survivors. And also the most important part of it is bringing all the disciplines together. So the clinicians should work together with the lawyers. They have to understand the language, the professional language of each other, and also particularly the health professionals should be well equipped and learn to work together in a multidisciplinary way. Particularly the psychological evaluation had been always ignored in the forensic field, because everybody just considered that psychological findings would not be an evidence at all. But with the Istanbul Protocol, we managed to just persuade the legal professionals also that psychological evidence is sometimes the only evidence we have. Because many of these people are arrested and put into detention for a long period or in prison for a long term, and all the injuries, the physical injuries, are healing. But the psychological findings might just persist with many cases.
You need the documentation to be able to prove that torture actually happened, don't you?
Of course. And for the war crimes also, we used Minnesota Protocol, for example. It is also a UN document about effective documentation of summary executions, extralegal, arbitrary executions. So Istanbul Protocol started with the idea of Minnesota Protocol.
Now, you were arrested in 2016 because you supported a campaign in support of the pro-Kurdish daily Özgür Gündem. Tell me what this campaign was all about and why you joined.
Özgür Gündem, for many years, had been under attack of the state, unfortunately. In 1990s, many of the journalists who worked for Özgür Gündem had been killed, and the building of the newspaper had been burnt, demolished several times. And recently, after 2015 elections, Again, Özgür Gündem was under suppression, particularly the editor. One of the human rights defenders, again, the president, the co-president of Human Rights Association, started to act as an editor for the newspaper. She is a lawyer originally, but then she had so many cases against her. Then we decided to support the newspaper. We discussed with some of the colleagues and human rights defenders, and everything started so that we would act as a guest editor for one day, and around 40 people just joined and worked as guest editors. Immediately, we had invitations from the prosecutor's office, and the prosecution had started that we had terrorist propaganda means that the news in the newspaper were terrorist propaganda. So all of us just decided to have dates for the courthouse to go and visit the prosecutor for our testimonies.
The whole thing must have felt surreal.
Yeah.
You must have thought, this can't really be happening. This is a dream or something.
No, it is. It can really be like that in Turkey, because for many years, just working on the field, working with the torture survivors, and also as a human rights activist, I know that it's very easy to be arrested. It's very easy to be sent to jail and stay there for a while with the pre-trial detention of long terms, unfortunately. So, of course, from outside, maybe it is horrible, but from inside, it's a real experience, because then you experience what your applicants, the torture survivors, experience. Of course, they were very respectful with me, the police officers and the wardens in the prison.
So your time in prison wasn't disastrous, it was okay?
Of course, and in that time, in 2015, 2016, before the coup attempt, the failed coup, the prison system was better in many ways, because there were several procedural safeguards that we have struggled hard to realize in the country.
We know just how difficult it is to get a fair trial as a human rights activist, even as a journalist, even as a citizen in the Turkish courts, and yet you managed to clear your name. Tell me what the trial process was like for you, and how did you manage to prove your innocence?
Actually, I still didn't prove my innocence, because at the last trial in July, it seems that we acquitted, because the judge just told that I don't want these kind of cases to be on the agenda of our country. So I want to drop these from our agenda and just have the judgment with an acquittal. So we were very happy. But in the previous day, the prosecutor just refused this acquittal and sent the file to the appeal court.
So from day to day, you have no idea what's happening?
No, arbitrariness is the real situation in the country now. So you can never know what will happen at the end. And also, I have another case insulting the president, this case, and also the Academics for Peace case.
Yeah.
They're all at the appeal court. We'll see what will happen. Still, I can be in prison. Maybe for a longer time this time. But as I say, it was an experience.
Does it ever make you think, when you look at the state of human rights in Turkey today, does it ever make you fear for your own safety and think, is it all worth it?
Of course, fear is always there for everybody. Because we know and we witnessed many of the human rights activists being shot. In an age that I have been a communist in my youth, and afterwards an anarchist, and then terrorist. So whenever the state decides to call the opponents with a name, I had that name.
You're used to all these labels then.
Yeah.
It
So
means nothing anymore.
We have this stigmatization in the country. The most important part is, apart from the governing bodies, what the public think about this situation. So we try to explain them that we are not terrorists, of course. We're against it.
Understand, because there's so much propaganda and there's not much independent critical media out there, that the general public in Turkey probably don't know what the real truth is. So is there any fear, do you have any fear that some of them may actually think you're terrorists?
There are people with the elite, with the government. Of course, they think that we are terrorists, but not as much as they want. Because just last year, I read a report about the internet trends of the country. It is very interesting. The social media use in Turkey is nearly twice the other countries. Among public, it is more than 65%, which means that people do not rely on the mainstream media.
And finally, the international community don't appear to be doing an awful lot with regard to Turkey. If I could ask you, what do the international community need to do, one thing to do, to make Turkey go back to democracy and rule of law? What would that one thing be?
Monitoring is very important. With the European Court of Human Rights having a proper legal proceeding for all the Turkish applications is very important. But they just want that all the cases should be exhausted in Turkey. All the national means should be exhausted in Turkey. We don't have a rule of law. So in the past, for example, the European Court of Human Rights didn't wait for the exhaustion of national means. For today, they have to consider this situation again.
And the waiting list is up to 25 years, I believe.
And we talk about the time of all these legal proceedings. So a late justice doesn't mean justice anymore. They have economic relationships, and even with all this situation, they continue to sell weapons to Turkey. So maybe they have to stop the economic relationship.
Mrs. Fincancı, thank you so much for joining us today. And we thank you at home and online for joining us for another episode of IOHR TV. Join us again next time. From myself, Trish Lynch, and the entire team here at the United Nations in Geneva. Goodbye.